Hi, I'm Leland, and I worked on Protocol KOLs. Some brief overview about myself. I currently work at Galaxy Digital, working on the investing team. Prior to this, I did a lot of freelancing work, helping protocols with design work or front-end engineering. And here we're going to present about Protocol 100, which is a project I built that was funded by a Uniswap grant.
Leland, I think the screen share is not working properly, so we want to just give that a shot one more time. I think we're stuck on a froze. Perfect. And then, yep, everything's good.
Great. So going through the UGP journey, got a grant early last year or I guess early this year to build out a governance dashboard. And then I happened to get a full-time job. And then so like, as the process turns out, it's like, okay, I will work on it this weekend. I will work on it next weekend. And it turns out several months later, the entire market has moved. And at the time when I talked to Ken, he was like, hey, Ken, I really want to work on a governance dashboard that shows the current progress of proposals, like who's voting on what, how they're voting, how's the vote changed. But by the time I really started building it, the market had moved already. And we have companies like Tally and Boardroom really fill that niche. And then at that point, I realized there's no point in building another, governance dashboard that just replicates what other people are building. So it's back to the drawing board. Like what's new that we can build that hasn't been built before? And at the time, it seemed like these tools are really good at showing snapshots of protocols. You look at a protocol in isolation, but it's not great at combining protocols together. So the question was like, what's some interesting data that we can show that aggregates protocol data together? And that's how Protocol KOL came around. So protocol is a amalgamation of like a protocol plus a KOL. A KOL is a key opinion leader, more commonly in the US known as an influencer. And then we slapped on 100 at the end. And the goal here is to create like a list of influencers or a list of KOLs who are in the top 100 biggest influencers within crypto, or biggest influencers within crypto governance. And there's many ways to measure governance. We can look at in terms of like how active you are. We can look in terms of passivity. We can look at like whether you're being active on chain or passive on chain, or this off chain. And so what's interesting here is like, in terms of like, you could be very active on chain by like submitting proposals, and then we can look at the engagement of these proposals to determine whether they're popular or not, and that could be a gauge of influence. We can see, whether you're voting, which is slightly less active than submitting proposals. And then on the alternative side, something that's very passive is your token balance. You could have, hundreds of millions of dollars delegated to you, and yet you never vote at all, but you still have some amount of influence because you have a lot of latent influence. If you wanted to vote, like you would have a lot of influence, but yet you choose not to vote. And so we see in some of these protocols, we have some of the top, 5 delegates have maybe only voted like once or twice, yet they still have a lot of influence by virtue of, having a lot of tokens. We could also measure influence in terms of like who's delegating to you. If someone, quote unquote, famous is delegating to you, should that make yourself as a protocol politician like more famous? A lot of university programs have been delegated by Andreessen Horowitz. So the question is like, should we be paying more attention to you because of this? Like, do you have more influence? And then we can look at, whether you have a lot of delegations or not. On the converse side, we can measure influence from an off-chain manner. And so this could be something like more passive, like, are you engaging on social media, on forums? Are you participating in off-chain voting? We can look at like your audience size, like do you have a newsletter? Like, are a lot of people reading it? Do you have a lot of analysis? And these are a lot like softer, so it's a lot harder to kind of like quantify your influence. So in terms of calculating influence, we can imagine having like a very complex or like well thought out methodology to determine like who is more influential than someone else. For example, we could like look at your success rate when it comes to submitting proposals, your votes, protocols involved in, etc. And we can like weight these all appropriately. However, I guess I took the easy way out and it's like, okay, the actual calculation of influence we'll do here is we look at how many votes you've been delegated and we just like times it by the token price. And clearly, like, this is not the greatest of methodologies and it's probably quite horrible because some protocols have like, multi-billion-dollar market cap and some protocols are much smaller. And so like, if you're medium-sized delegate in Uniswap, of course, like your weight is going to supersede and overcome smaller protocols. But I think it's a fun, like memeable metric that we can use, which kind of goes in hand with what I was building here. So let's jump in. So protocol.club. Is my screen still being shared?
Yes.
Perfect. So when we load up the app here, it starts by giving you an alert and along with like a legend of what's here. And so the question is like, who are the governance influencers? Who is within the top 100? And we can select different protocols. Right now we have Uniswap and Compound selected. Let's add Pool Together and Radical. And while we wait for it to load, like we can see, we have some addresses that rank in the top one. This is the rank, this is their name, address or their name from Sybil. We have their quote unquote like vote weight, which is in tokens delegated times price across protocols. We can look at the total number of delegates. We can look at their proposal number, and then we can look at the number of protocols that they're active in. And what's quite profound is across these 4 protocols, it's actually quite uncommon to see someone active in all of them. And actually within the top like 100, there's only one person who does participate in all 3 protocols. So just like an interesting like data point, we realize that like influence is very localized. It is like localized within like 1 or 2 protocols at max. So here we can like, drill down and look at individual delegates and see how much like voting power they have. Some other features here is we can go like search for particular addresses and it'll say whether they are in the top 100 or not. And we cap this at 100 explicitly because I don't know. I think the fun part about memeable leaderboards that you need to have some amount of like caps to it. Otherwise, like your leaderboard will have like thousands of people, and it's less fun in my opinion. So some interesting observations that I had when I was building this is that there really is like concentration. Like how does this? This method of like weighing, protocol politicians is horrible because if you look at like Uniswap, huge market cap, or so if you look at like Pool Together, it's much smaller. So I think, ultimately in the long run, like if you want to create a good index for measuring like who are these quote unquote influencers, like you can't just multiply tokens delegated by token price. And we've seen like other like good tools that measure KOLs, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done here. So behind the scenes, this is built using a lot of like some hooks from Sybil. We pulled the data from the graph, and like I guess my hope for this project is that it becomes a meme that people are like, okay, I'm ranked 20 on the Protocol 100 list. Thank you, Kartik.